Hello, what's up everyone? Welcome to this new live stream. I'm pretty excited about this live stream because it's a brand new format. It's the first time that I'm doing this format. I'm going to review a take-home project, so a project that was made by someone while they were applying to an iOS position. And what's particularly nice is that this is a real-world project. This is a project that someone in the audience has sent me and asked me for my opinion on it. And since I don't really have the time, the bandwidth to do this on a one-to-one basis, I was like, hey, how about I do it during a live stream? They said yes, and so here we are. So we're going to review a real-world project, and we're going to try and see what could be improved. So the key piece of information that you need in order to follow this live stream accurately is that this is a project for which the person didn't get the job. That's what they told me. I didn't ask for the feedback they got on the project on purpose because I don't want to bias myself, but this project wasn't successful. The good part is that it means that there is possibly a lot of room for us to try and improve it. Before I go into this project, I want to start by a small disclaimer. Actually, a disclaimer in two parts, which seems important given the topic. The first one is that, as I've said, this is a real life project made by a real person. So, of course, if you have any remark, any feedback, whether it's in the chat or in the comments, please make it. Please feel free to make it. But please also keep in mind that it's a real person who made it and that this person will most likely read your feedback. So what I'm trying to say is don't be mean, be nice. That's what I'm trying to say here. So please keep that in mind. And the other thing is that when you have a take-home project, it's because you're applying to a position. And of course, applying to position means like getting a job, which means getting money. So usually it's the kind of moment where the stakes are quite high, and I just want to state clearly that what I'm going to show in this live stream is only my opinion. It doesn't mean that my opinion will match that of the person who will review your own assignment. So I'm saying that just to say that if you feel that what I'm showing or one advice I'm giving, it won't work in your case, maybe you're right to think like that and follow your gut. That's what I'm also trying to get at here. Just follow your gut and please don't apply something that I've said just because I've said it, even though you think it doesn't make sense in your case, because it probably wouldn't be the right thing for you. So remember, be nice when you share feedback about this project and follow your gut when you make your own project. My goal is, as always, to give you ideas, to give you food for thought, but then I'm trusting you that you will apply it as best as you can. If you want to check out the project yourself, I've put the link in the description of the video on YouTube. So if you're watching on X or on LinkedIn, please go on my YouTube channel to find the link if you want it, but it's available. You will find the project as it is as I'm starting the live stream, and once it's over, I will push a new commit with the changes made during the live stream. I see a few comments in the chat. Hello Martin, hello Brian. I see some people are watching from far away. We have both people from France and people from Kurdistan, which is quite far in the world indeed. All right, let's get started. So I'm going to show you Xcode now. And before we go into the project, first, let's have a look at what was the assignment. What was asked of the person who took this assignment. So I have the assignment document right here. So it's also in the GitHub project. So the goal is to create an app with a list view and a detail view that matches the following design. So you can see it's something that is quite straightforward. You have a list and a detail. You can see that clearly the emphasis isn't put on design because it's not particularly beautiful. Typically here, the black on the purple isn't the most legible, even worse for the blue and the purple. So the goal wasn't to assess the design skills of the candidate, but rather their iOS skills. You might even notice that in the design, there isn't even the disclosure indicator that lets you know that you can click on the item on the list. There is no separator or anything. That one might be on purpose because maybe the goal is in part to see if you know how to hide the separator, but it's interesting to see that a strong emphasis isn't put on the design. So what should the app do? The app should download and utilize the following test data. So it's a JSON file that is hosted on GitHub, and you can see it's an array on JSON with what? Like a few items, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, give or take. And we have a few Pokemons with an ID, a name, description, and an image URL. So nothing too crazy here. And then what do they ask to take into account when doing the assignment? So match your application's design to the provided images. All right. Download the test data file using URL session framework, no third-party framework, so no Alamo Fire, for instance, which makes sense because there is no real reason to use Alamo Fire for something as simple as downloading a static file. Create the app using Swift. Good to know that Objective-C is being evaluated here. Create a single application with 2 versions of the screens, 1 version in SwiftUI and 1 version in UIKit. That's very interesting. And to be honest, I hadn't found this requirement when I said, yes, I will do this live stream. And when I found it while preparing, I was like, whoa, it's even better than I thought because I get to review. It's like 2 in 1. You know, I review both a SwiftUI and a UIKit assignment. So it's interesting. It's also the first time that I see an assignment with this requirement of doing both SwiftUI and UIKit. So that's quite interesting. I guess it might make sense if, for instance, the project that you're evaluating for uses both SwiftUI and UIKit, or you want to assess that the candidate knows their way around both technologies. So that's quite interesting. I hadn't seen that in the past. And provide a mechanism to switch between the 2 versions in the app. Interesting here is that this could be understood in several like different ways. Like, should it be just like a button when you launch the app that says, okay, UIKit version or SwiftUI version, or should it be like a mechanism that allows you to switch at any given place of the app between the 2 technologies, which is of course way more complex to implement. Use the MVVM pattern for both SwiftUI and UIKit. So that's good because it gives some idea of what architecture you should put into place. Create the UIKit screens using zip files, not storyboards, and auto layout in Interface Builder. So that one was interesting. So they don't want you to create views in code. Why not? I was surprised that they said zip files and not storyboards because you can say, for instance, you can say 1 storyboard per view controller, or you can say you can create several view controllers in storyboard but handle the navigation outside of the storyboard. I was surprised that they would enforce zip files because, I mean, I would say that a storyboard with 1 view controller per storyboard, you have the same feature than zip files plus a few other features that you don't have in zip files. So I was a bit surprised by this one. I guess there is probably a logical reason behind it, but I was surprised by this one. Bonus point for adding UI test for the screens, which is interesting because when they say bonus point for adding UI test, it kind of implies that you're supposed to do unit test. It's part of the package. So that's an interesting way of, I guess, telling you without telling you that you need to do a unit test. And finally, when creating your project and sharing for our team, please ensure the repository you are using is private and you are sharing it directly with someone on our team. So I guess maybe their goal was that their project wouldn't be seen publicly. In that case, sorry, because it's what I'm doing right now, but that happens. Sorry about that. One thing that's interesting that is not present here is the amount of time that you should put on the project. If you give a technical assignment to candidates, I would suggest that you give a time frame of saying, okay, you should spend that much amount of time on the project and not more. And try to make it reasonable, like not more than 1 day, even less than 1 day can be even better. To give you an idea, where I work currently, so at Photoroom, it's 3 hours for the technical assignment. So 3 hours, and you don't need to spend more time on it. I didn't spend more time on it, and I thought like in 3 hours you can still evaluate a few things. So that's kind of nice. And I would also say, since I've done once a technical test where they ask you to spend 2 days on it, usually if they ask you to spend a lot of time on a technical test, it can be as a candidate a bit of a red flag of like maybe they want to test whether as a candidate you're willing to spend a lot of time. It's a way to evaluate how much a candidate will kind of like obey what they are being asked, even though obey might not be the right word, but you get what I mean. And also in a way, the more time you spend doing the test, the less likely you are to say no to an offer, even if it doesn't match 100% of what you're looking for. It's called the sunk cost bias. So be careful if you see technical tests that ask you to spend more than 1 day. Like 2 days already a lot, 2 days are a lot, and more than 2 days, I would say it's way too much, unless they compensate you for it. But when it's several days, it's quite rare that they offer compensation, because it would be quite expensive to them. All right. So that's the topic of the assignment. And one last thing before we go into Xcode, it's to see the README that the candidate provided. So you can see that they said that they have done all of the requirements, and they added this little paragraph, which we're going to go over. So they say, I developed this project as simple and understandable as possible. I added more than one URL session fetching style, combine async await, interesting. I added both UI and unit tests. There might be a lot of things to do. After reviewing my project, I would like you to discuss it with me in more detail. I believe there are always better design, so I am looking forward to hear from you and have a great conversation with you. So that's the information that the candidate wrote to the destination of the reviewer. Now let's go into the project. So first thing, and it's what I liked when I opened this project, and to be honest, it's such an important thing that it's also what made me want to do this review live, is that if you look at the project, it's structured. You have the name of the project, then you have a utils folder, you have services, you have models, you have SwiftUI, UIKit, you have the scenes. These two things, they could have stayed maybe at the top level, but still you can see that it's structured. And if you have a tech assignment to do, I would say spend a bit of time to have a good structure in your project, to have a good project structure, because it's the first thing that the reviewer will see, and give the signal of like, if it's well structured, it gives the signal that that the person like has spent time to make an effort. It will be easy to review, so it's a good way to like send a good signal to the reviewer. So please try to do as well as the candidate. I think the candidate has done a really good job here. And yes, I agree that what the candidate has wrote about wanting to learn more is very good. And also when they reached out to me, it was the same thing. They wanted to learn more about how they could improve. And to be honest, it was a DM on LinkedIn. Sorry if you send me DMs on LinkedIn, but I don't have the bandwidth to answer DMs on LinkedIn. There are just way too many for me to be able to realistically answer them. But the message like seemed to really come from a good place, from someone who wanted to improve. So that's what I was like, okay, what can I do to do it? I had this idea of this live stream, but yeah, I had a very good feeling about the candidates' like desire to learn, to progress, and to better themselves. So what do we have? We have a utils folder with some extensions on command types. We have some constants. Then we have services to load data. We have a model, which is shared between SwiftUI and UIKit. Then we have SwiftUI with the detail and list view, and UIKit with also detail and list view. And the scenes, the app delegate, and then the test. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna launch the app in the simulator. So something that was interesting when I tested the app the first time is that I'm a big fan of dark mode. So of course my simulator was in dark mode, and I saw this. I saw an empty screen, and I was like, wait, that's weird. Like the project doesn't work. And actually I was like, no, if the person asked me to review the project, that it works. So I left dark mode and I saw that now it was working. So the project doesn't seem to fully support dark mode. So that would be like a first feedback, even though like if I see a project like this who doesn't support dark mode, I wouldn't reject it just because of that. But that's one thing that might be interesting to keep in mind, is that it's very possible that the reviewer will have either their Mac or their iPhone in dark mode. And so if you don't support dark mode, maybe not perfectly, but if the app looks broken on dark mode, that might send a bad signal. So that's one thing that could be improved here. And I think it's probably not too much. It's probably that the colors here are not set correctly. So actually, we'll try to see if we can improve it. It will be one of the things we will experience with. So let's look at the UIKit version. So we can see that it matches the design. All right. scrolling is smooth. If I go into dark mode, okay, in dark mode it works perfectly, so that's great. One small thing is that here, so here, if you look here, you can see that it doesn't go all the way to the bottom of the screen. So actually, let's have a look at what was asked in the... Oh, so you can't see... it's interesting because in the... You can see that in the assignment, it's not cut off, so you don't know like what should happen. They show you like it's like this. So I would make it go all the way to the bottom of the screen personally, but it's true that the assignment doesn't ask you to do it. If I had made the assignment, I would have made it so that you would need to go all the way to the bottom of the screen. This way, it's a good way to see if the candidate not knows the API, but knows how to find the API to be able to go or yeah. So exactly, it's also cut off in the design, so it's not clear on that point. But if I were to design the assignment, I would make it so that you have to go all the way to the bottom of the screen. This way, it's a good way to see if the candidate knows how to do it, both in UIKit and SwiftUI. I wouldn't expect someone to know how to do it like on top of their mind by asking the question during an interview. But when you're at home and you have the time to search, then it's fair game because it's something that you can be asked about in your own day-to-day work. I meant. All right. So let's keep going. So I'm gonna get rid of this, and let's see. Let's click on something. So navigation works correctly. Let's look again with the assignment, but yes, seems to be correct. All right. So everything seems to be working as expected. And now if we go into SwiftUI, so we can see it's presented modally. I guess the goal was to show that the candidate knew how to do both. So interestingly, it goes all the way to the bottom in SwiftUI. Personally, I think it looks better that way. That's a design choice, so it can always be you can always like not agree, but it seems to work nice. You can see that in the design there is supposed to be a padding on the right, which we don't have here. Let's see if we add it in. It was there with UIKit. In SwiftUI, we don't have this little padding right here. So to be fair, if I wanted to have really like a precise design, I would give a link to a Figma file and not just like 2 screenshots. But it's a little improvement. Once again, I wouldn't reject a candidate because there is no padding here. But it's a small thing that could be improved, but definitely not something that would make you fail. All right, and here it seems to also be correct. Okay, and yeah, same thing here, the top margin. There is no like top margin, but on the other one, yeah, there is a little bit of a top margin. So it's small things. I wouldn't consider them like eliminatory or anything. I'm just like trying to make observations as I go about it. I didn't try SwiftUI in dark mode. Yeah, it works perfectly. All right. Now let's have a look at the architecture. So we'll go all the way at the top. So let's start with the app delegate. So app delegate, nothing special happening here. In the scene delegate, so we can see that so we have a manual starting of the app. So you can see that in scene will connect to session, so the entry point of the app. So let's see. We create the window, all right, using the window scene. Then we create the main view controller. We'll see how load controller is implemented, and then set it as the root view controller of the window and make it key and visible. That seems perfectly valid. One question from Pavel: how many projects will you review today? If more than one, no, I will only review this project, and I think there will be already like enough to spend like between 1 and 2 hours, like usual. So there will be only one project today. And if this format is successful, maybe I will do it another time with a different project. We'll see how it goes. So, okay, this seems very good. Let's see load controller, how it works. So that's smart. Extension on UI view controller, and then load controller by saying you create a nib, so self to create the view controller, and then nib name, so using the name of the type, and because self is the type because we are in a static method, and bundle nil. So that's pretty smart. You can see that there is a very clever comment. Make sure zip file name and your controller are an exact match. That's perfect. You could even go further and add a unit test to make sure that it's gonna work, but that's pretty good. And so this here, it returns indeed UI view controller. So that's smart. So that's definitely something very positive that's been made here, both because it's useful, but also because it's a good way to demonstrate to the person reviewing the project that you know what an extension is, you know how to use it. So that's like double positive. So very smart. This seems perfectly good to me, at least. Like when I've done this in previous live stream, that's how I've written it. So that seems to be good. The rest of the methods that are empty, I agree with not deleting them, because you could be thinking, okay, why not delete them if they are empty? I would say let's keep them because Xcode creates them by default. There are the comments by default that explain when you should put code into each of these methods. So honestly, to me, it makes sense to leave them like that. So what do we have in this main view controller now? So we can see it's implemented through interface builder for the UI part. There is the UI kit button, the Swift UI button, okay, 2 buttons. View did load, prepare view. So in prepare view, it's like a setup UI kind of method. So it's also mentioned that this could be moved to IB designable to be configured interface builder, which is also correct. I think that IB designable is about to be deprecated, but it's always good to mention it. So definitely something positive. All right, set title. All right. Yes, I think it's because so the black color didn't change because of the CG color here. When you do a CG color, you can be sure that when you switch from light mode to dark mode, it won't switch automatically. You will need to manually listen for the change in the trade collection and implement the new color yourself. I'm curious. Oh yes, because it's at the layer level. Okay, so that makes sense. And so the actions UI kit is going to create a list table coordinator with navigator, which is the navigation controller, and then start it. All right, so there is the coordinator pattern. That's interesting. And Swift UI button. So Swift UI, it creates an HTTP task, it injects it, and then it puts into a UI hosting controller the Swift UI view. Okay, seems pretty nice. We can see that there is a bit of like a coordinator level code here in the view controller. To be honest, it's a view controller who is purely technical, so you could put it into like another like file, but I'm not that sure that it's here because it's only like it's only a few lines. If you wanted to improve, what you could do is to involve either a dependency injection framework or put together a dependency injection pattern, because here HTTP task cannot be injected with like a mocked version, for instance. So that could be an improvement. It wasn't asked, and there is already like a split of responsibilities. So that's something to improve, but it wasn't asked to put in place dependency injection. So I wouldn't hold it against the candidate. Personally, if I'm interested to see in how the candidate implements dependency injection, either I ask them to do it by saying explicitly, like in the assignment, you will need to use dependency injection, or bonus point if you use dependency injection, or if I want the candidate to come with it by themselves, then I would put a sentence that says like, consider that this application will be going to the store and will be maintained for several years and will keep evolving with additional developers being added onto the project very regularly. For instance, to try to convey the fact that you want the candidate to come up with a real world architecture which is time proof a bit. But still, I would still prefer to be explicit because when you start to go implicit in tech assignments, usually you make it actually you introduce like variability, and it's not what you want. You want to have as little variability as possible so that you can evaluate the candidates on a fair basis. Both because it's fair to the candidate and also because it makes your job easier as a reviewer. So I would go with something as explicit as possible. And then let's look at the storyboard. So we have the button right here. So we have two UI buttons into a stack view. All right. The constraints seem reasonable. Okay. Interesting, these constraints in terms of height. So the fact that it's greater and equal to 48 and less than or equal 48 and greater than or equal 38 and equal 38. It's very interesting to have these three constraints. Like these two seem to be completely like superfluous. Like if I remove them, what's gonna happen? Yeah, it seems to still work. So these two constraints, they seem superfluous. I'm not sure what was the logic in adding them, but you definitely don't need like. Let me just put them back so that I can show them to you, because I think I think that I was hiding them actually. Where were they? I was on the stack view, and I was looking at the constraints of the stack view. Yes. Let me move the window just a bit so that you can see them. So you can see that there is the less than or equal 38 constraint, greater than or equal 38, and equal 38 for the height. And these two constraints, for me, they don't make sense. So I don't really understand why they are here. I would remove them. So for now, up until now, that's the first mistake I see where if I saw just this, I wouldn't consider it like a fatal mistake. But what I would do for sure is that I would take note about. That's one of the issues I have with this project. And then I would do an assignment review with the person and I would ask them, so here there are these three constraints. I don't understand why there are three constraints. Can you walk me through your logic? And then the person can say either they don't know why they've done this, and it will be very visible, and then you know that maybe they're not as good as you thought they were, or maybe they will tell you just, oh, so yeah, it doesn't make sense. I made a mistake. I went over the thing several times and I didn't thought to clean it afterwards. So I would just try, ask them to speak about it. And I think that's the best way to do it, honestly, because this can be this kind of mistake. Having like these, I want to put them back so that I can show you. Yeah, having these superfluous constraints, it can be both like just a small mistake of not have been paying enough attention, and that can happen, and if it's just that, it's okay. But it can also be a sign that the person doesn't understand how constraint works. So for me as a reviewer, it's an opportunity to actually deep dive into something that will be insightful. So honestly, when I'm reviewing a project and I see something like that, I'm kind of happy because I have something that I can discuss, and I know that the way the discussion will go will give me a very good insight on what will be the next step with the candidate. But of course, when it comes to being like technically correct, you don't need these three constraints here. If you want to say that you have a height that is 48, you say height equal 48, and that's it. The rest is superfluous and not needed. Not only not needed, but also, since it's not needed, it can only introduce issues. Actually, it won't introduce any benefit, but it can only introduce issues. It's like if instead of writing if A else, you wrote if A and then down below if not A. yes, it does the same thing, but then if you update the first, you might forget to update the second, so it doesn't make sense. Like trust the tools that you have. Interesting remark. Personally, I would consider them requiring me to use storyboard as a red flag. So that's a good remark. I would say it really depends on the project. If you're hired to work on a project that needs to be maintained and that uses storyboard, it makes sense to evaluate the person on storyboard, both because you evaluate the skills for the actual day-to-day job and also because you're being honest in showing them, in doing a test that matches what they will work with on a day-to-day basis. So at least I think it's pretty honest to do it that way if that's the case. I think that's the only thing I had to say about this storyboard. Let's just have a look at the button because I was surprised that the text didn't switch to white by default. Oh, you can see tint here. It's black color. Oh, okay, so yes, so there was black color put by default. By default, would have been something like this for a button. It was put in black, and I think that's why, because black color. I think if you put label color, you know what? I'm gonna put label color, and we'll see how it goes in dark mode. Yeah, so label color, it gets translated into white when you are in dark mode. So it's a small mistake. What's kind of like sad about it is that if the candidate had kept just like default and didn't try to do anything else, it would have worked perfectly out of the box in dark mode. So it's something that can happen sometimes, like when you want to do something that is extra nice and then you actually introduce an issue. It can happen. It happened to me in the past. So once again, it's not eliminatory at all, but that's the reason why it didn't switch to in dark mode. It didn't switch to white automatically because it was using black color and not label color. So label color is a semantic color, whereas black color is just like an absolute color. We can say there are name colors also, which is quite interesting. So if I go into the assets, there was the toolbar color that was created. So a nice way to show that you know how to create this kind of colors. I see a message. I was asked to do such an app plus Viper architecture plus core data plus all tests plus design of my choice for a trainee position. For a trainee position, it's definitely a lot. Viper would be also a red flag for me, to be honest. So yeah, that kind of matches what I was mentioning earlier, like technical tests where the goal is not as much as to evaluate your technical proficiency, but also how much you're willing to put up with the demands of the people who make the test. So good to be aware of this dynamic because of course sometimes you cannot afford to say no to an internship or a job, but it's always good to work in something like knowing into what you're getting yourself into than discovering it a little bit later. Viper is awful. Honestly, I kind of agree, and I'm very proud to say that in what now, like when did I start iOS? 2011. So in almost, yeah, actually, no. It's been more than 30 years for me because my first internship was February 2011. So in more than 30 years, 13, not 30, 13, I'm not that old. In more than 13 years of doing iOS, I have never written a single line of Viper code, and I'm very happy that I've never done it. So yeah, Viper. Plus, I think it's like completely like fallen into oblivion now, so that's pretty much a good thing. How is a trainee supposed to know all of that? I guess the goal is to have trainee that will do actual projects, and then to bill the customer the cost of a real engineer while paying the trainee a very small amount of money. Like you pay the trainee for a month what you built the customer for a day. I've been there. I know this kind of situation. But I guess we all fall into this at one point or another. So let's go back to the topic at hand. So the detail view, the list view first. What's interesting is that we have a coordinator pattern. So that's kind of nice, honestly, to have put in place this coordinator as an extra effort, because remember what was asked was What was asked was MVVM, but not coordinator, so that's nice. So we can see we have the coordinator, it has a reference to the navigation controller, and then on the method start, it loads the list table view controller, so with the same load controller method. Then it creates the view model, sets the coordinator to self on the view model, and pushes the new controller using the navigator, okay? And then we have a method show detail that creates a coordinator for the detail screen, and calls start with the item. So that's nice. That's quite well split. Honestly, if I had to do it, maybe I would have done a single coordinator that would have handled like both screens. Since the screens are very simple, it doesn't seem crazy to me. So having split it into two is even more effort. So that's kind of nice. I kind of recognize this architecture because it's what I had done in a previous video about how to implement the coordinator pattern. So I'm familiar with what I'm seeing right now, and it seems to have been successfully implemented. One thing that's interesting is like, why is this method public, for instance, even though the actual class is internal? That's interesting. So I'm not sure that this is needed. Actually, there is a very easy way to know it, is that you can remove the public access modifiers and try to build the project again. And if it builds again, since it's an app and not a third-party framework, it builds again. So yeah, exactly. Good to see that we had the same remark. So there is no need to make it public explicitly. So once again, it's one of these things that I would take note and then I would ask the candidate about it. I had the same case at work when I was reviewing a project, I think like 1.5 years ago, where the person had used an actor in a place where there didn't seem to be any real benefit to using an actor. And so I like took note, and then I asked, and the person said, "Oh yes, there is indeed no real benefit, but also like no real harm, and it was could have been a final class. He did an actor, and but there is no strong argument to choose between one and the other at the current stage of the project, and I think that's a very valid explanation. And the person was hired because it was not an issue at all. So. Here, indeed, I think this is not needed. So what I would do is that I would say take note, just like the extra constraint, and then ask the person, and the way they explain it will probably give you a strong insight. To be honest, I've made the mistake, for instance, once of writing internal by default, even though it's not useful, just because I wanted to show that I knew about it. And it really depends. People can say like, I mean, obviously you don't need to write it and it's not useful, but sometimes you want to show that you know it exists, and so you write it even though it's not useful in that current situation. So I can understand also how that might happen. So once again, it's one of these small things. When there are only like a couple of them and you can explain them, it's okay. Of course, the issue can be if there is like half a dozen of these small things in the project, then that can be an issue, because basically it's going to create a doubt in the mind of the reviewer, and the reviewer, the hiring manager, what they want is that they want to be able to make a decision without being scared of regretting it in a few months. So anything that creates a doubt in their mind is something that you want to avoid. So that's something to keep in mind, even though I know that it's very easy to make these small mistakes. Then inside the view model, so we can see that the classes are final, which is a good choice in this case, because the final class allows the compiler to do some nice optimizations, because it knows that there won't be any subclass, and so it can do some compile time optimization, because it knows that there is no risk of having to deal with overridden. For instance, because the class is final, the compiler knows that this method here cannot be overridden by a subclass, and so it can statically resolve the access to the method. So that's a very good choice to have put a final class here, even though since we're at the app level, the release app would be built with whole module optimization by default, and so this would be kind of inferred, but it's still a very good point to have put it. And if you can even explain it if the interviewer asks why you've put it there, then it's something that is very positive. So then we have coordinator. The HTTP task protocol is private. We can say there seems to be a protocol to allow dependency injection further if needed. So that's very good. We have the member wise in it. Okay. And this method, which is the equivalent of a fetch data kind of method. And it uses combine to return its result. So the candidates said in their README that they used on purpose both combine and async await to show they knew how to do both. That's interesting to do that. I would say you can even take it one step further. What I would have done in that case, I would have used async await because I think it's the one that's the most appropriate for this simple kind of networking. And I would have simply in the README said I've used async await. I know that there are other alternatives like combine, but I think for fetching a single static file, async await is the best choice because it's the one that involves writing the less amount of code. And I think it's a great way to go about it. So here I would say, like, level 1 is just doing either async await or combine and not explaining why. Level 2 is what's been done here, so doing both to show that you know both. And level 3 would be to justify that choice and to say either I've done both but I think this is the best, or I've done just this one because I think this is the best, and give a reason. That's the first real advice that I would give, because I feel right up until now I've given some small advice but not something that's really actionable and you can apply in several situations. But this would be the first one I have to give, is that when you're doing your technical assignment, every decision that you make like consciously, that you make because you think it's a good choice, you should explain why in the README. So for instance, here say I marked the class as final because I know that it enables the compiler to make some optimizations. And why not put a link to what states that in the documentation, or to a resource, a trusted resource that explains it. Same thing here. I've chosen to use either combine or async await for this specific reason. I think when you do that, it's very powerful because it demonstrates that you have a good level of understanding of what you're talking about, and also it puts you like in control, because when I'm reviewing this code, I might be wondering, okay, so he used async await in one place and combine in the other. Does he really know the difference? Does he have an opinion? This kind of thing. Whereas if you are explicit about it, then you take control of the narrative and the person is reacting to what you said. So I'm like, okay, the person said, I've used async await because I think it's the best. I agree or I disagree with the opinion, but at least you're leading the conversation. And I think that's a very good thing. So that would be my first piece of advice. Every choice that you make that you think is a good choice, document it, explain it. Even if it's just 1 or 2 sentences, that will really go a long way to demonstrating a good level of understanding, a level of mastery over the technology that you are using. Was there minimum Swift API constraints? No, there wasn't. There also wasn't any constraint on the minimum version of iOS, which personally I would have put because it's, I mean, if you want something simple, just say latest major version, so iOS 17 for instance. If you're looking for compatibility for older versions because it's important for you, also write it explicitly. But in any case, write it, and if it's not written, I will assume it's just like the latest major version. That seems fair to assume this. After async await with Swift 5.5, it's very difficult to find a use case for combine. So yeah, I think it was more of a case of wanting to show that they know combine. Maybe also like in a discussion before the assignment, maybe in a screening call, combine was mentioned. But I agree that for this kind of use case, async await is the way to go, definitely. Okay, so we have an any publisher. Okay, so here what's interesting is that this code in the view model, using the URL and everything, it's something that you might actually put into a service. So have an intermediary level between the view model and the networking. This way you could have a mocked version if you wanted. So that's also something that could be improved here. Let's see what the view controller looks like before we dive deeper into the networking. So view controller, so there is a view model, all right. There is a table view, cancellables because we're using combine, okay. So here we have private var and a did set to reload data, which is kind of nice. Okay. View did load, so prepare the view. So registering. So it's interesting to do a register because that might not be necessary depending on how it's been set up in the storyboard. Okay, delegate data source. You can do it in code or in storyboard. It's fine as long as you do it consistently. Like don't do delegate in the code and data source in the storyboard. That's a bad idea, but otherwise it's fine. Okay, so view fetch receive on. Okay, sync receive value. So interesting here. We can see that the closure about completion is not used. I think there is. Isn't there a way to only provide? Isn't there a way to only provide a second closure? I don't remember if there is one. Yeah, there is this one. You see, sync receive value. Oh, but it's when it never fails. Okay. Okay. So it means that here the publisher can return an error. Oh, so that's interesting. Yes, okay. If there is an error, then it's going to okay, to fail. Okay. Okay, so there is an error potentially. And here. So wait, no, I wanted to show this one. Sorry. I also would recommend better error handling, more generic error. So error handling could be better indeed because here it says if there is an error. Oh no, actually, so to be honest, I find this a little bit hard to read. I prefer it this way. Let me change it. Yes. So if the URL isn't correct, then error because it's a bad URL. So that's okay because it's only handling the case where it was a bad URL. And then there is download with combine, which already returns a publisher of something with an error. All right. So indeed, the error is not handled. I think it's okay for this kind of test. To be honest, but I would have still preferred if there was a comment that says error is currently ignored. Once again, be explicit about things. The technical assignment didn't specifically ask for error handling. What you could do if you want to do it in an easy way is to display some kind of toast or message that says, okay, an error has happened. You might go further and introduce a retry button. Why not? This is easier to do in SwiftUI than in UIKit, to be fair. But in terms of feature, having a way to retry might indeed be something to improve. It's hard to tell whether the reviewer would have expected this to be done, but it's true that it's something that could have been improved. And I'm saying that because doing retrying is not hard, but it's also not like super easy. So if you do it, you might be. It's a good way to set yourself apart from a candidate that has only recently started to use iOS. So that's something that could be improved. First, be more explicit about why you ignore explain why the error is ignored, and even better, handle it in a proper, maybe simple way, but still a proper way. So we have weak self correctly being used here, so that's nice. I saw another comment which was, so I saw a few other comments. So there was already an extension. If it's written in utils folder, then I would use it. So what would you use the extension? What are you referring to in that case? What would you have put into an extension? Because I'm not sure I get it. Another comment: why is cancelable cancel in onDisappear function? So I guess I didn't get there. It's the SwiftUI part. I didn't get there yet because for now there is no equivalent of onDisappear being implemented in the UIKit version. Okay, so prepare the view. So I will go over the storyboard just after, and then delegate and data source. Could have been nice to have one extension for each, but it's more like of a nitpick, to be honest. So number of rows in section, so it's the count in the item, perfect. So here DQ else return a table view cell. To be honest, here I think it could be done better because normally, since you have registered a UI nib, here I would say it's okay to do something like this because to do a force cast, because this should, I mean, this is not a valid way to recover from the error because this is going to display an invalid UI. So this is a kind of like fatal error situation. So I would honestly say it's okay to force cast here and then have a test that makes sure that indeed the table view is displaying without crashing. But here it feels like returning something because you have to, but actually what you are returning is not enough to be able to successfully recover from the error. Then we have this configure method on the cell, which is interesting, and then we will have a look at it later. And finally, the did select, which calls on the coordinator on the view model show detail. Perfect. You can see there is a choice of making the view model on the coordinator and not the view controller. I would have put the coordinator on the view controller, to be honest, not on the view model, but I don't have a particularly strong argument for that. So for a simple app like that, to be honest, I wouldn't say that it's a flaw. I didn't expect it, but it makes as much sense as the view controller when you think about it. It's just, what do you consider to be like the entry point in your architecture? Is it the view model or the view controller? But both make sense, to be honest. Let me check the messages. One comment that says, as a reviewer, it can be interesting to test with no connection, airplane mode, for example. Yeah, so exactly. It's a good thing. To be honest, if I were to write the technical test, I would put a sentence to say that the app is expected to behave gracefully when there is no connection available, something like that. Because then you kind of you bound the expectation, because you could also say, okay, maybe the app should maintain a cache and the candidate should have infer this. I'm not saying you said that, but someone could go further down that logic. So personally, if I were to give an advice to someone designing a test, it would be everything that you want to evaluate, make it explicit. Don't try to put tricks for candidates. Honestly, you will just make your life more complex, and potentially you will penalize good candidates. So that would be my advice to people designing technical assignments. I see one comment about the state of the hiring market. To be honest, I have less comments to make on that because I am not following that closely, mostly because I'm not currently looking for a new job. But if you have comments to answer this in the chat, please do. But I will not. I won't mention it. I won't answer it because I don't have any something very insightful to say about it. Okay. So let's have a look now in the table view. Okay, so here we have a table view that seems like a default table view that you would get when you drag a table view in a storyboard, or rather in a Xib. Is it a Xib or is it a storyboard? Let's see. It's a Xib. So the candidate did respect what was asked here. So we have this table view. So plain table view. Okay. We can see that there is no separator. So I think it must have been, yes, separator none. So, and default is not that. So it was configured correctly by the candidate. Okay. And we can see that it doesn't go all the way to the bottom. All right. And we can see that, oh, but that might, okay. Because I was like, why isn't the cell configured in the interface builder? And I think the reason is that being able to configure a cell inside a table view, you can only do it in a storyboard. You can't do it on a Xib, because I don't see the option to do it. And actually, it's gonna be very easy to test. I just need to go like, so no, it's also a Xib. Where do I have, you know what? I'm just gonna create a storyboard, if I can spell it correctly. So creating a storyboard, I'm just calling it test because I will remove it just after. So a view controller, let me drag in a table view. Not trying to do this like a proper way, just want to see. Yes, then you can say, so I put Xcode way too big, that's much better. You can see that you have choice of like content, dynamic prototypes, and then you can put prototype cells. So this is much better to do it that way. So that's why when the assignment was saying like only use Xibs and not storyboard, so that might have been on purpose, but it makes the configuration of the storyboard of the table view a bit more painful than it ought to be honest. So if it was made on purpose to force the candidate to manually register a cell, then that's fine, because that's what you were evaluating and it was mentioned explicitly. But if that's not the case, and the person who designed the assignment wasn't aware of this, then I would say maybe like say like one storyboard per view controller, because you're making things more complex for no reason. Okay. So that seems pretty nice. And yes, Andre, you were explicitly saying it, so that's the reason why in view.did_load in this method here, I'm just gonna make it so that we have a bit more room to read it. You can see that like that on the table view, it's registering the Xib. So nib, Xib, the same thing. Nib, it's a Xib that has been compiled. It's the same thing. We are registering the nib for the reuse identifier. Otherwise, the table view wouldn't be able to dequeue the cell because it wouldn't know how to create it. Interestingly, here, this would have been also a good place to use another extension that uses the name of the type. That would have been a good way to use this approach here. That's a small improvement, not a big one, but just pointing it out because I've noticed it. All right. What else do we have here? I think we can go have a look at the cell now. So let's see. So we have the cell with its own Xib. So in the Xib, we have an image view and then some labels. So the labels, they touch the image view. So I would have added the standard like 8-point margin, even though to be fair, since there wasn't a Figma or a sketch file provided, you can never know for sure what was asked to be done, unless you start to do like some measurement on the PDF file, but it would make no sense to waste time on this. So seems okay to me. I said there is a stack view here, then a poster image. That seems okay. You might have gone with an horizontal stack view first and then a vertical stack view here. To be honest, both would be okay for me. How did I do it to split across several lines? I knew someone was going to ask me. It's Control and M. and it's something that was added recently in the latest Xcode. So Control plus M, and you will be able to do it. And if you want more tips like this, I have a replay for live stream called 65 tips to use Xcode like a pro. And actually it's 66 because there is this one which is also mentioned and it was not in the initial list. So if you want to learn 65 more tips, you can check this live stream also. After this one is done, you have chapters and everything, so you can really like skim through it. It should be pretty interesting. All right. By the way, I'm just looking at my streaming software. I see there are 400 people watching. The number is amazing. I have come to realize that it is a little bit overestimated because I think for LinkedIn and Twitter, it counts even people who have like seen the live like for a few seconds in their feed and then have scrolled away. But 400 is always a nice number to see. And I'm glad to see that you're enjoying this little shortcut. It's one of my favorites, to be honest. Okay, so this cell seems nice, and then we have the method configure with an item, so it's statically typed, so that's perfect. And then text subtitle, and here load image. So that's pretty good, to be honest. Let's have a look at the model part now to cover everything. So the model is codable and hashable. Okay, there's a struct. Everything is a let, and that makes sense because there is no need to mutate anything in the app. One thing, so that's interesting. You can see that it's marked as codable, so that's perfect. And I guess the name of the properties match what you get in the JSON, so no need to declare coding keys. It's marked as hashable also, and you can see that first, let's make. I'm not sure why it's marked as hashable. I'm not sure why. Maybe for SwiftUI, but we'll see. I will try to remove it and we'll see what breaks. What's interesting is that you can see that for equality and for hashing, it's only using the ID and not the rest of the properties. You could not implement both methods and then the compiler will auto-generate them because hashable conformance implies equatable conformance. But it would do so by using all of the properties for comparing equality and generating the hash value. Sorry. Here, this code only does it for the ID. It's a small optimization. To be honest, I am not sure that it's needed at this stage for such a simple app. So once again, it's something where if I would write this code into a technical assignment, I would take a couple lines in the README to say, okay, I've done it because it's optimization. I'm aware that it's not optimization that will make a strong difference for such a simple app, but I wanted to show you that I know how to do it. That could be a way to do it. You're saying I bet hashable for the SwiftUI list. That might be the case. But wouldn't it need to be identifiable for that? To be honest, I'm not 100% sure. You know what? I'm just gonna remove hashable and we'll see what breaks. So what breaks is okay. So it's because of the for each. Okay, so it's because of that. Okay, so the hashable makes sense. I would have written something to explain why explicitly only use the ID. One other thing that could be improved here is that it's called image URL, but it's not a URL, it's a string. So it could have been nice, and maybe it's what was expected here by the reviewer, to actually write an init, rather the init where you init from decoder, I guess, and in the init from decoder to properly handle the case where this is not a URL. So the way to do it would have been simply here. So it would have been like, let me try and write it. So this code here would still be valid. It would be something like let image URL string, for lack of a better name. And then you do something like guard let image URL equal URL string image URL string, else you throw like some kind of error. So I'm gonna do it in a way that is quick and dirty. I'm creating like a modal error, for instance, and I'm gonna do like case invalid URL. Might not be the best way to go about it, but at least it allows you to do something. So it will be rather modal decoding error, and then decoding error invalid URL like that. And so here it would be something like this. So here I need to do something. No. Oh yes, of course. Now this needs to be a URL. So it says that I have an error. Oh, because here there is a lot of code. Okay, so I'm also going to write a convenience in it. What did I get myself into? I think there is a feature in Xcode to do refactor generate member-wise init. Yes. So I'm gonna generate a member-wise init. And so here actually, so I'm going to copy and paste the same code. You might want to put it into a static function. Actually, it would be better to put it into a static function that can be tested. But here I'm just going to copy and paste so that it stays simple. No, actually, no. Actually, the better way to do it would be, I think, in the constant. So here, no, that's not this one. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna fix. Yes, but now this one also expects. Okay, so I'm not going to fix everything because otherwise it's going to take like a bit too much time, and I think you understand the idea. But here, having type safety here would have been nice. To be honest, as a reviewer, I also would have added some kind of timestamp, some kind of like value that has something to do with like either time or a number, but to force some kind of decoding that uses a formatter. I see a good remark. Can't Codable handle a URL? You know what? You might be right about it, to be honest. You might be right about it. Is URL decodable or not? I'm not sure actually. How can I check if it's decodable or not? How can I do it? Actually, I can do it very easily. I can just do something like self.imageURL equal like that. So I have an error that says cannot assign value of type string. Oh yes, because it's decode, so it would be something like that. So that seems to be valid actually. So that seems to be to build. So actually, yeah, you don't need to implement it. You just need here to have to set it's a URL instead of a string. So this, I'm going to put the code like it was, but let me get rid of all of these things. But yeah, here having a string is not perfect. I'm going to note it so that when I commit the changes, it will be visible. So let me add a little bit of an emoji to say would be better if URL because it centralizes the check for validity. The idea is that this way, there are two advantages. It's that first, the check for validity is centralized and done only once at the creation of the Pokemon item, which is better than having it being sprinkled in several places of the code base. And the other advantage is that it becomes impossible to create an instance or rather a value of type Pokemon item if the URL isn't valid. And that's even better because it guarantees like a correctness by construction. So this, I think, is a good improvement that could be made. So that's something that could be improved. Let's when I check that the project builds correctly. Okay. So that was for the model. And then for the service. So HTTP text protocol. So there is two methods, one to download with async, one with combine. Okay. So they both take a URL that is parsed. So that's kind of nice because it kind of gives a strong boundary to what the responsibility of this protocol. And then we have a class that implements it. So HTTP task. And we can see that there is this handle response. Okay. Where is this used? Oh, it's used to, okay. So personally, I mean, I tend to put first it's more nitpicking, but I would have written the code the other way around. I would have written it like this because you start like with the entry point. So we have this code and then what's coming next, handle response. I feel it's more natural. I know people who prefer to do it the other way around, but to be honest, I always prefer to put the private stuff near the end because it's supposed to be internal and it's supposed to, if it's actually that's a good way to evaluate also like if your private stuff is correctly designed, is that normally the private stuff is supposed to be strongly linked to what's needed in this specific file, and so the private stuff shouldn't make sense in and out of itself until you have the full context. So if you can understand what the private stuff does as soon as you enter the file, maybe it's a sign that it shouldn't be private to this file actually. Whereas if it doesn't make any sense until you've read the rest, it's a pretty good sign that indeed this should be private and encapsulated away. So we have download with combine, okay, data task publisher, try map with the handle response, map the error, okay. Interesting to see this call to map error. I'm not sure what it actually does and whether it's necessary. If you remove it, it doesn't break. Let's see. Seems to still work. So I'm not sure what map error does here, to be honest. So once again, I would add it to the list of asking why did you put this? It's possible that it was needed at some point because the code was written differently and then it's no longer needed. But here, I think map error is not needed. Try map is useful, and try map is a good choice because try map allows you to map with a throwing function. But map error here is just saying here is the entry and I'm just returning it. So it's like this is the identity function. So I'm not sure that it makes sense. And then erasing to any publisher. So erasing to any publisher kind of makes sense, even though I think with the more modern features of Swift, I think you could do something like that. Of course, you would need to also do change it right here, but I think you can do something like that. So it cannot be some. Could it be actually any rather? I think it might be more like any. And then, yeah, because this one would also need to return an any publisher. And here we have the same thing. You cannot use receive. So I'm not quite, I don't remember 100% how to make the change. I don't think it's bad to use any publisher, honestly, in Combine. But if you can find a way to write it using the more modern feature of Swift, which is to use any like this, it would be bonus point. But the way the code is written right now, I wouldn't say it's a problem, save for this line, which I think might not be needed. So same thing. Let me leave a comment that says not sure if really needed. Okay. I see one question. What's the type of $0 in map error block? Type of $0 is an error. So map error, the idea is that you have map which allows you to map the result. Map error allows you to map the error to another error. So it can make sense if you want to translate, for instance, a network error into a business error, into an error of the business domain of your app. So it can be very useful. But in that case, I think it's not doing not doing anything. One comment, so hey Vincent, I love your videos. I must say your English pronunciation is really great. I just wanted to point out that ID should be pronounced ID and not idea and not ID, like the French ID. Yes, true. That's very true. Usually, so one thing that's good to note, to kind of like decode when I do live stream, is that when I miss a pronunciation in English, sometimes it's a sign that I'm getting tired, because I notice it, like, oh, I'm focused on something else and I forget. Sometimes I can see it in like I will say like static correctly, and then as soon as I focus on something else, I'm a bit tired, I will say static, even though it's static. So usually it's a good sign to see whether or not I'm starting to get tired. But yeah, it's idea. Yeah, I guess it makes sense. But thanks for pointing it out. Where were we? So download with async. So this one, perfect. So this one is good. Here, the delegate, since there is a default value to nil, this is not needed. You see, you can remove it also. So not sure that delegate is already nil by default. So I'm not sure that you need it. So delegate argument. So yeah, that's not needed. I wouldn't write it in that case. So here we have the same method being called, and in case there is a catch, we do throw error here. So that's perfect. I think what could have been even better, because doing a do catch and then rethrowing an error and then throwing an error, is that actually I think here you can just get rid of the do statement like that, and it still works. Yeah, you don't need to do catch and then throw the error again. Since the method is already throwing, you can just try, and you don't need to do your try inside a do block, because the method is already throwing. So it's fine to just call try, and Swift will automatically propagate the error to the caller. So actually, the do block here is not needed. So let me also write a comment for this. This do block is not needed because the method is already throwing. And as a kind of like way to spot it, when in your catch you're only throwing the error and not doing anything else, it's a sign that actually your do catch is not useful at all, because it's just saying, okay, do this, and if there is an error, just propagate it upwards. And that's exactly what throws here already declares. So this is not needed. So if you have this kind of thing in your code, just remove it, because it's not doing anything. What's interesting is that this right here is doing the same thing than map error right here. So at least there is a symmetry in the two of them, but unfortunately it's a symmetry in introducing stuff that is not really needed. And then here the method handle response. So having put the logic into a function is great. Having put it into a private function is even better, to be honest. So that's really nice. And so guard let data response as HTTP response status code is in the, so that's perfectly fine. I think there is even a better syntax to check for this kind of interval in Swift. I think it would look something like response.status code, and I think then it's like tilde. I think it's like tilde equal and 200. I think it's something like that. I'm not sure. Does this build or not? Or maybe it could just be actually like just take this and be like take this and be like contains and then response. Yeah, that would be probably better. So yeah, you could also write it like that, but this is perfectly correct, and I'm perfectly fine with the way it was, with the way it's been written. So if it's not the case, then bad server response. All right. Of course, in a real app, you might go like a bit deeper, but this seems fine. And then here decoding, and once again this do block, you can get rid of it. It will still work as you would expect it to work. So this one is also not useful. Let me also write this down. Okay, no, not like that. Okay, so this one is a bit like both hit and miss. I like the handle response. I don't like the fact that there is code that is not useful, and I think what's doing a disservice here is that this code which is not useful, so this map error not useful, these do blocks which are not useful, when you write code that isn't needed, it doesn't demonstrate that you know what you're doing. It can give the feeling that, okay, the person is just like putting together a few things, but without really understanding what's happening. So I think this might have done a disservice to the candidate, to be honest. Let's see what else we have. The web image loader. So having created a file to handle image loading is pretty nice. That's a pretty good way to do it. I see it's a class that might have been an opportunity to use an actor here, even though I'm not sure it justifies itself. It really depends of whether you have a cache or not. So once again, handle response, download with combine and with async. And so, yeah, it's just a different type. Okay. So it's good to have created a separate file to download something, but since it's actually the same thing than here, actually, what would have been better, because I didn't mention it, but here we have an array that's being mentioned. It would have been better to make it generic. You make it generic, something like T decodable, something like that. And then here you say that you return T. Same thing here. Of course, yeah, you would also need to make it at the level of the protocol. So you need to create an associated type and everything. So I'm just going to put it back like it was, but I think what could have been better here is that this is hard-coded. The return type is hard-coded, even though this is super generic code. It's taking a URL and downloading it, decoding it, and returning it. So it would have been way better to use a generic type with a constraint that the type must be decodable. And I think that's probably what the reviewer might have expected. So that's definitely something that would have been better to improve right here. And the loader, it's nice to have the loader. What's kind of like disappointing is that it ends up doing the same thing than the previous file without the constraint that it's decodable. So it would have been better to try and put everything into one single like HTTP downloader file. It makes sense to have a web image loader separately if you also implement, for instance, a cache. Storing in a cache, a simple cache, and making it an actor would have been nice. And you can say that it's a simple implementation. There are probably edge cases that you haven't thought about or things like that, but that would have been really nice to make it an actor and have a simple cache, which is just like a dictionary. No need to implement a strategy to empty the cache or anything. Make it basic. That would have been, I think, a nice addition. Would using a third-party SDK such as SD Web Image bring any value in the eyes of the reviewer? Honestly, I would say it also makes sense to use SD Web Image. The assignment didn't forbid you. I mean, the assignment said no. The assignment did say that you had to use a URL session to download the test file, the JSON file. It didn't say anything about images. So honestly, given the way it's phrased, using SD Web Image would be okay for me because it's not forbidden. And you can explain that it's something that is industry standard and that's used in many apps, and that it implements the solution to the problem of fetching images very well. So honestly, personally, I would be okay about it. To be honest, I don't think the way it's done here is a bad way to do it. Meaning doing it manually. My only negative feedback is around the fact that we have a separate file that states that its only purpose is to load images, but actually it's not doing really anything specific for images besides calling this init right here. So there is probably a way to either add more features to this, such as a cache, or put everything into HTTP task and make it simpler. What else do we have? So here the constant, which is, so it could have probably been good to make it directly a URL rather than just a string. This way you don't need to create several different. I mean, you don't need to run the test that it's indeed a URL in several different places. One comment that says, yes and no, I think this way you can show what you can do manually, but if you specify exactly why you did the image, it should be fine. Yeah, exactly. And it goes back to my previous point, which is like, be intentional and say, okay, I did it manually because I thought it was expected, or I wanted to show you how to do it. But I know that there is also this framework, which is probably better for production because there is a cache, there is all of these nice features. Just explain it. And basically, I would say, when you do a technical assignment, the goal is not to make this app. This app is just a tool here. The goal is for the reviewer to have a good idea of your technical skills. So anything that can help them think, anything that helps you demonstrate that you have good technical skills should be mentioned. And so saying, I know that there is this library which is very popular and very much used in the industry, can only go into that direction. SwiftUI has async image. That's true. Even though async image is honestly, the few times I've used it wasn't that great. So I'm not sure that I would use it in production, to be honest. I have some memories. I'm not 100% sure, but I have some memories of having to remove it from apps after having starting to use it because it's not great. I don't think there is a cache also, so it's good to use it, but maybe if I were to use it, I would say maybe it's not the best thing to use in production. And yeah, exactly. The goal is to show that you are familiar with the SDKs, you know what's being used in the real world, and just demonstrate your skills. Basically, that should be that's actually not that should be that is the underlying goal of an assignment, is to demonstrate your technical skills. So this one we saw at the beginning, and this one, so load web image. So on the UI image view, so I guess it's being called in the cell. If I go back to the cell, where is it? Yes, it's called on the cell, so load web image. And what it does, yeah, you see it gets the URL, so it tests it once again. So this should only be tested once in the model, definitely. And then there is a task, so loader. The loader is created here, so that's not the best because it completely breaks dependency injection, and then it tries to download. And if it succeeds, then it sets the image. And candidate says you don't need to use main actor.run because UI image view is already running on the main actor. That seems absolutely valid. And that's a great example of a comment that demonstrates that you know what you're doing because you have this knowledge about what main actor is. Just by reading these two lines, I am confident that the person who wrote it knows what main actor does. So that's very, very useful. And yes, NSCache, indeed, quite a useful type to implement some caching. Okay, now let's have a look at the detail view, and I see that's already been 1 hour and a half, so maybe I will try to speed up a bit so that we can also see the SwiftUI part, and probably the detail view will be very similar, so we can see that we have a coordinator, but just like we saw before. The view model here is not very useful, but it makes sense because all the data is actually already been fetched. Interestingly, the view model doesn't own. That's interesting. You can see that the view controller, I didn't notice it, but the view controller owns the data and not the view model. That seems to be a problem. For me, the data should definitely be owned by the view model, because this is model and view model. So there is just the wording makes it logical for it to be here. So I didn't mention it because it didn't I guess it was so obvious I didn't see it, but this should not be here. This should very much be into the view model. So this should be in the list table view model. So that's quite an issue. That's quite an issue because I guess what would have been expected then is to implement a way to observe when there is a change in the value, because here what's happening is that there is one call made here, and then so the view model, this is called, the items is updated, and then reload data is called, but MVVM is not done perfectly here. What should be done is that in the view model, this call, the view model should implement a method fetch data that would then have this code, and then what would happen is that in view did load, the view controller would subscribe to changes in the items, and when there is a change, it would call reload data. So this could be done, I think. This could be done using the combine approach by making this be an observable object, and then you take wrong file. You take here this and you mark it at published. That should do the trick, and then you only need to to subscribe to the publisher of the property. So that should be the way that's the way it should be done. But yeah, indeed, this should absolutely not be here, and that's quite an issue that it's here. So if I go back to the detail, so same thing. Here the item should be in the view model, but it should not be in the view controller. Also, there is no reason. I mean, it's force unwrapped because it's in the view controller, and the view controller uses storyboard, and you have to force unwrap it, or rather to implicitly unwrap it. But this should be moved to the view model, and in the view model, there should be no reason for it to be implicitly unwrapped. Same thing here. There is no reason for this to be implicitly unwrapped because you have control over the init. And then you see, here there is quite a problem because the coordinator is passed afterwards, but you can just do it like that, and you can see that it works. So this view model has two problems. First, it should definitely own the data, and there is no reason for something to be implicitly unwrapped here. The reason why you have properties that are implicitly unwrapped is because when you do storyboard, you don't have control over the init. You're forced to use init from libname, or I don't remember what the name is, but you don't have control over the init, so you cannot provide values at init time, and so you need to set them later. So you could make them optional, but then every use case you would need to deal with the potential nil value. So for shortcut, we put them as implicitly unwrapped, but this is a risk because if we forget to set a value, the app crashes and the compiler cannot check for it. So this syntax of implicitly unwrapping something, you should only do it when there is no other way around it. And here in the view model, there is definitely a way around it. I've implemented it. So this one is quite a strong issue, to be honest, because it demonstrates that you don't know how to implement something that is type safe. It might also give the impression that, okay, you've seen that in a view controller, it's like this, so you're doing the same in a view model, but without really understanding why it's implicitly unwrapped here in the view controller. So this one is quite an issue. There is always a way to avoid force unwrap. No, that's a good point. In a way, yes, because you can always. So that's a good question. For this kind of properties that are purely Swift, yes, you can write them like this, and then you will just need to deal with the potential nil value at every use site. So this is more of a convenience, which comes at a risk. When it's about an IB outlet, I think same thing. You can put a question mark if you want, but it's okay in a way to implicitly unwrap because you have the guarantee that normally the storyboard should have set the value. But here, my general advice would be don't use storyboards because you get rid of all of these issues when you get rid of storyboards. But yes, technically, you can always remove an implicit unwrapped value by just turning it into a regular unwrapped value. Implicit unwrapped, just basically when you implicitly unwrap, it's the same than if you were to do a force unwrap every time you use the value. It's exactly the same thing. And yeah, exactly. Even more for the data, getting data, because for the data part, since you have control over the init of the view model and the coordinator, there is no reason to have anything that is implicitly unwrapped indeed. Okay, and just let's have a look at how the view is implemented. So an image view here, and then a label with, I guess, number of lines 0, so that it shows as many lines as needed, and then a constraint, which is that it's greater than or equal to 0. So that seems correct to me. Okay, just want to see the assignment again, just to see. Yes, we can see that there is only 3 lines of text in the list. I just want to check in the list how this was done. Okay, we can see that there is 0 for the number of lines. All right. So we've seen the UIKit project. I would say the UIKit project, it's nice, but indeed there were some mistakes. The key mistakes we've seen, I would say I've seen 3 of them that are really an issue for me. It's the fact that here it's not checking that it's a valid URL at decoding time. That's something that is an issue because it makes your model less sturdy and reliable. So that's the first issue I see. The second one is the fact that the seemingly generic type HTTP task actually isn't generic at all because it's all hard-coded in the return type, and it would have been better to use a generic type that conforms to decodable. And the last one was that in the detail view, there were issues in the way that the view model was implemented. So actually both view models were implemented incorrectly because both view models don't own the model. So that's a big problem. And also this view model, more specifically, was using implicitly unwrapped values that were implicitly unwrapped properties that were not needed. And that kind of showed probably a lack of understanding of when it makes sense to use an implicit unwrapped value versus when you don't need to use one. So that's the 3 rather, there are 4 of them. Yeah, there are 4 of them. So the fact that the view model doesn't own the model, which is definitely the top one. If I were to rank them, yeah. If I rank them, view model not owning the model is number 1. The implicit unwrapped stuff here is number 2. The fact that HTTP task isn't generic is number 3. And no, actually, the fact that URL isn't properly decoded is number 3, and HTTP task not being generic enough is number 4 because it's the least important of the mistakes. Is there any concern about using many storyboards? It was actually in the requirements. They were asking to use 1 xib per view controller, so that was actually in the requirements. So this one is okay. Data owning in VC was there. Yeah, definitely. It's crazy how since it's the biggest one, I have trouble remembering it because it seems like the view model not owning the model seems like something that you shouldn't do, and so I couldn't remember it. But yeah, I agree. That's definitely the biggest issue. So if you want to see a good way to implement a view model, or not, maybe not the best way, but a good way with some good explanation. I've made several videos about it. I have one video about that shows how MVVM works in 90 seconds. So that's good to get an introduction. And then I have a previous video that talks. I have previous video that talk about like how MVVM works, how a coordinator works, the difference between MVVM and MVP, so view model and presenter. I have all of these videos that you can check out if you want to learn more about this. But yeah, the view model indeed wasn't the best, which is a shame because the project is still nicely structured and there are good things about this project. But indeed, that was probably the biggest issue. And now let's look at the Swift UI code. I will go a bit faster because I don't want to spend more than 2 hours in this live stream. So let's have a look. So we have, I'm gonna hide the preview so that we have more room. So we have a root view in Swift UI. So actually, what's being used in the what's being used? Okay. So it's using Pokemon list view. So this seems to be the entry point. So, oh, it's the row view. I read the root view. It's because it's almost 10 p.m. and I'm getting a bit tired. It's not the root view. That's why I was like, why is it a root view? Okay. This naming is not the best because here it says views. Okay, but this is also a view. So it could be like internal view or just like even like rows. To be honest, this group is not absolutely needed. I would say. I think you can just like you can just take the file out when there are only 3 views. It seems okay. To be honest, definitely not a big issue, but that seems okay to me. So let's see. So it uses the state object approach, so not the observable approach, okay, which is fine. So Pokemon list view. So there is a view model, which is a state object, okay. It's being initialized here. And there is this syntax right here to initializing a state model after a state object during the init, which is not the best, but it's also, I mean, it doesn't look right, but it's the best one I know. So if you know a better one than this, please let me know, but I'm fine with it because I don't know a better one. The environment to get away to dismiss the view, so that's nice. And in the body, we have navigation stack, we have a scroll view, we have a lazy v stack, and then a for each. That's interesting because I guess the reason is that was probably to get more control over how to show the list. I think you can use a list, and I think now you can hide the separator if you want. But it's interesting to use scroll view and lazy v stack rather than a list. But it's not incorrect. And then in the lazy v stack, you have a for each. So navigation link, okay. So it's the old approach where in navigation link you directly define the destination view. So it's not the decoupled approach that is also available now. And so iterating over the items. So this time the items are stored in the view model, so that's much better. Okay, and then there is a spacer. All right, the spacer after the lazy v stack. Okay, I'm not sure that it's needed to be honest, the spacer. Activity identifier because for the UI test, I guess. Oh no, I'm sorry, I misunderstood it. Okay, so navigation link contains the row, and then there is the nice syntax to decouple navigation. So it's great to see that it's being used. And then here we have the, so when we ask to navigate to something of type Pokemon item self, then it's by going to a Pokemon detail view. So that's perfect. Okay. Navigation bar items with dismiss. All right. It seems very good also. Navigation title, display mode inline, toolbar, okay, with the correct color. All right. That seems to be pretty good. And then a task to call the fetch data like method. All right. A preview where stuff has been injected. That's nice. Would have been even better if there had been a mocked version, but I wouldn't consider it a big issue for an assignment review unless it was explicitly asked. Okay, So this one is pretty nice. Let's see what we have in the view model. So here it's done correctly. So this is a correct view model because we have the item being stored in the view model. It's marked as @main actor, which is a very good idea, I would say, because this way, when actually I'm trying to wonder, like, what if we remove the main actor? But I think it's it's important because this way, since the property is published and it will be listened to by a view, you cannot change this property outside of the main thread. So main actor is going to make sure that is the case. So actually using main actor here is great. Same thing, if you can leave a comment somewhere explaining why you've used it, it's even better. But it's a great way to have used it here. Okay, and then Gardlet, all right. This time the error, at least there is a print. So yeah, having a print is better than nothing. So actually, in the UIKit version, let me reopen it. So it was here. Just doing a print would already have been better than nothing. So like little trick I give you if you don't want to bother yourself with implementing error handling, you can just print to the console and then say in the README, I've implemented a very basic error handling, which is just to print the error to the console, and it could be improved by showing a button to retry, for instance. Doing this doesn't take too much effort, honestly, and it's much better than not doing it because you've explicited the fact that you understand that error handling is important. You didn't do it, but maybe you won't be judged as lazy because you haven't done it, because you have taken control of the narrative. So keep that in mind. Okay, so the view model is pretty nice, and I don't think I have too many things to say about it. And then here, Pokemon Raw View. Oh, so now I think now I understand. I understand why it wasn't. Yeah, because identifiable, you need to have an hashable ID. And when we look at the list here, okay, the ID is self. Okay, that's why the ID is self. Okay. It could also have been that you make the Pokemon item conform to identifiable. Honestly, both syntaxes are equally correct for me. There is a comment about the color here. Better avoid referencing color by name directly. Now Xcode can do a trick and infer the name like an interaction case, if I remember it correctly. Yes, Xcode has a way to do something kind of like what SwiftGen was doing before. Actually, yeah. So it seems to be just like that. It generates it for you, but it's iOS 17 or more. So here the project isn't set. It's set to iOS 16. So maybe there was a requirement to do it like that. The project is quite recent, so it's from last week. So, but that's a good remark that you made. Thank you. And in a technical test, if you're asked to do iOS 16, you can always mention, okay, here I could have used this more modern API, but I couldn't because of the requirement. But it's always better to mention that you know about the more modern option, because once again, you're showing your expertise. And in the row, we have an H tag, and then this tag, okay. If let image, it shows the image, if there is one image, all right. And there is a task to download the image. So yeah, once again, this here, by implementing this at the model level, it would have avoided this additional check, and then try to load the image with Web Image Loader. So typically here, the Web Image Loader, it could have been injected into the environment. It would have been a nice way to improve. So because here it's used as not as a singleton, but the instance is created inside the type, inside the body. So there is no way to inject something else. But it could have been injected through the environment. To be honest, that's what I would have probably done in SwiftUI. Use the environment and create an environment key yourself. once again to both to show that you know how to do it, but also because I would say it's a better pattern. Here, I'm not sure that the main actor run is actually useful because the view is already main actor. So to be honest, I'm not sure that this here is actually useful. If I comment it out, will I get a warning or something like that? Doesn't seem like I do. But you can see that when we load it, so now it's in memory, but when we load it, we can see that there is no, maybe it was only the first time, but there was no loader while the image is being loaded. So adding a small loader might have been also nice and maybe something that was expected by the reviewer. But I think here this, not sure that, I'm gonna write it, not sure if needed since view is already at main actor. So I see a good remark that says, but it's I moved what I show on the live stream without wanting to. Okay, it should be back. But it's in a task. Indeed, it's in a task. However, that's the beauty of Swift concurrency, is that you're in a task, indeed, but as soon as you touch something that is at main actor, Swift is going to automatically switch you back to the main actor. And here, image is main actor because it's a property of a type that conforms to protocol that is main actor. So transitively, it's main actor. And the view, I mean, I would be very surprised if a view wasn't main actor. So I don't remember having to write main actor in this kind of code, but I'm not sure it's useful to do main actor. The only reason would be if you were to write non-isolated here, but I'm not sure you can that you can do it non. How is it in Swift when you want to do something? If trying to search for the syntax. Is it just just like that? I think it's just like that actually. So what this, yeah, but you can, I don't think you can do it like that, but basically if you were to opt out of this being part of the main actor, then you would need to do main actor run, but I don't think there is a reason to do it here, to be honest. So I'm not sure that this is needed, and definitely don't put this kind of code if it's not needed, because it's something I've mentioned a few times, but when you put something that is not needed, that is superfluous, it gives the feeling that you don't know what you are doing, and it's definitely something that you want to avoid when you're doing a technical test. But all in all, the Swift UI part is better than the UI kit part. So here, there is even the preview that's working, so that's very nice. Could have been even better by having like a static method on extension of Pokemon type that returns the data rather than defining it here in the view. But to me, it's enough for this kind of technical assignment. And let's have a look at the detail view to finish. So detail view. So same logic to create the view model, and then we have a VStack. If there is an image, show it. Then a scroll view. So interestingly, the scroll view is below the image. It's more of a design choice, but it's interesting to see that there is at least a scroll view. Okay, and then navigation title, and just like before, a task to start downloading fetching the data. So fetch image. Okay, there might have been a way to avoid fetching the image by using, for instance, using async image could have been useful. I think here what I would have done is that I would have used async image and then show a loader while the image is loading, and maybe write down somewhere that async image is not the best to run things at scale, because it can have like either some small bugs, or on some versions of iOS, I remember it's not perfect, but for a technical test it would do enough. And so here, yeah, it's nice. We have the data that is stored in the view model, so that's perfect. And then this fetch image, which is okay, except the problems I mentioned before. So the problems I mentioned before are that here, this should not be here because it should be checked at the model level. This is not needed most likely. And here, this should be injected somehow. So you can't use the environment here because you're in the view model and not into a view. But this should be injected. But injecting it, I would be okay if the person said that this can be improved, but they haven't done it for the technical test because the requirements didn't mention anything about dependency injection. Okay, so all in all, I would say that the SwiftUI part was better than the UIKit part. It's very possible maybe that the developer who wrote this technical test knew SwiftUI much better than UIKit. Then that would explain why it's so much more better implemented in not so much more, but a little more. It's a little better in SwiftUI than UIKit. That would explain it. And so let's try to do a small recap about what could have been improved with this technical test. So the biggest one is that MVVM indeed wasn't implemented correctly in UIKit because the model wasn't stored in the view model, and that was quite an issue. The other thing, to be honest, to me would be that in the model here, it should have been not a string but rather a URL, so that the validity of the URL is checked when the model is decoded. And to be honest, I think the reviewer expected this to be done. The third one was that some view models, like this one also, some view models, I think I can remove this. Wait, yeah, I think I can remove the observable object. Some view models use implicitly unwrapped stuff when there is no real reason for it. And that's not great because it reduces the amount of check that the compiler can do for you. So that's indeed something that should also be improved. And then what was the last one? Yeah, it was mostly like the generic code to download that could have been made actually generic. I see the intent of trying to create this file, but this should not be hard-coded. It should just be a generic type and then have some kind of generic constraint like decodable like this. So after having reviewed the project, and yeah, there are also these other things that superfluous syntax that is not actually needed. So I think I understand why this project wasn't successful. Why this project didn't lead to the person being hired, because there were many things that kind of like maybe demonstrated. It's hard to say demonstrated because when you a tech assignment, it's always a proxy to evaluate a person, but it's never a perfect proxy. So like you can just like not be in a great energy the day that you do the project, and it gives a bad image of you. So I don't want to make a strong comment about the person because I don't know the person enough and their skill to do it. But this project, when I see it, there were mistakes on the architecture, especially on the MVVM. On the way to handle initializing dependencies, on the fact that there was superfluous code, that when I see the project, it gives me the feeling of someone that knows how to do iOS, but that might not know how to create a proper architecture that will scale properly, or to write code that will work properly and where there will not be some small edge cases that will not be working, or where there isn't room for things to break in the future. That's the feeling I get when I read the project. And so because of that feeling, I can understand that, especially for a position where there is some experience expected, or where someone is expected to lead, to have some role, kind of like technical lead or senior position, I can understand that the project wasn't successful. the good news is that with what we've seen now, I think that you have more than enough to know what you need to improve. It's not too much that you need to improve, to be honest. It's make sure that if I were to give actionable advices to a person who wrote this project, is to first make sure that they understand how the pattern work and the problem that they solve, and to really understand why this piece of data, or why this property, or why this code is put in this object and not somewhere else. And then also when they use features, to make sure they don't use them without reason, because writing code that is superfluous is really something that gives a bad impression, especially when it happens several times over in a project. And yeah, so learning a bit more about the pattern, about MVVM, learning a bit more about how to use generics, because generics were not used at all, and I think it could have helped improve. At least I think they were not used at all. I might have forgotten one use case, but I don't remember them being used. And so we said learning about the patterns, being careful about writing code that isn't actually useful. Same thing with code that can like lead to crashes, like the implicit unwrap stuff. Make sure that you really understand what it does and how it works, and don't use it in vain, basically, because it can create issues. And the last one would be the data validation. In this case, there is only one JSON to download, but there was still the URL that could be invalid. So make sure that you spend time implementing the data validation, because it's very likely that the actual app that you will be working on will need this kind of data validation. And remember that the tech assignment is just a way to evaluate your skills for working on the real app. And so if you don't do this part, that is probably very important in the day-to-day job, that will also be an issue. So if I were to grade this project, let's say if I were to grade it on a scale of 0 to 10, I would say that to move forward with a candidate, I would expect the project to be above like 8 out of 10. And I would say the project currently, it's likely at something like 6, between 6 and 7 out of 10. It's above the average because it's working and there are many good things in place. But there are still a few things that are missing, but not that much. So it's really a matter of like focusing on the right things. But you're almost there. I would say that you've done already a good part of the way. You probably even done the majority of the work, but there's still a small part that needs to be done. And once that's done, I think that with the improvements I've suggested, I think that this technical test would be successful. At least I would find it successful for myself. I mean, if I were to evaluate it. I see a comment, maybe if it is for a junior position, it can be good. Indeed, it depends. I don't know the level of seniority for the position. For an internship, would be really good. For a junior position, it really depends on the kind of company, what are their expectations. As always, companies that pay a lot of money usually expect a lot from candidates for good reasons. There are several tiers of companies, so it's good to keep that in mind. But yeah, I guess for a junior position at a company at the local level, so like in your city or neighboring, this might be enough. If you're applying to like a hot startup or something like that, this is likely to not be enough. To be honest, when I give advice for technical assignment, I would prefer to take the hypothesis of the harshest judgment, because I don't want the candidate to take my advice and then fail an interview because of that. So that's why I'm trying to put the bar not irrealistically high, but still put it at the highest level than what you can find on the job market. Let me see a few comments that I might have I've missed. Thank you, Nelson, for the kind word, and thank you for watching all the way from Chile. An extension with some mock data for preview would have been nice. Indeed, it would have been nice since the data is not reused several times. It's not too bad, but indeed it would have been nice. And let's see. Yeah, I think we've covered almost everything. So I'm glad I did this in a live stream because I definitely wouldn't have been able to spend 2 hours for one person just because I don't have the time and bandwidth. But I think it was a nice. It was nice for. I think it was nice for a live stream. I see one comment in model. We cannot use URL because we are using Codable. Type should be matched. So we covered this a bit earlier. There seems to be an agreement that URL can be decodable by default, but even if it isn't, you can still implement the init from decoder yourself and then implement any kind of business check that you need. So that's definitely not a blocker. It's just that it will either work out of the box or you will need to write a little bit more code. But in any case, it's of course possible to implement any kind of check when you create a decodable instance, because with decodable you have control over the init. Once again, it's the thing that you don't have with interface builder, but here you have control over the init, and so you can do whatever you need. So Ish is saying, hi Vincent, I really love your content and the way you explain things. Thank you. Can you do a video covering the newly announced App Store privacy restrictions specifically related to using third-party SDKs? Well, aren't you in luck? Because it's what we've covered last week. So on my channel, you have the replay of the live stream of last week that covers exactly this topic. So you can actually go check it out. There is even a chaptering with a recap at some point. So feel free to check it out. But it's been covered already. So let me go back to Facecam before we finish. So a bit more than 2 hours. So I'm glad I've kind of like respected what I wanted to do, and I can feel in also like with my voice that it's been 2 hours. So that's perfect. Before we finish, I want to thank, as always, all the people who've been watching and commenting in the chat during the live stream. There were really some great comments that really made this feel much more lively, but also of better quality, because several things were mentioned that I might not have picked on just by myself. So thank you. Also, a big thank you to the person who actually sent me this project. I think this project was really great for this live stream because it wasn't yet at the level that was expected, but it wasn't super bad either. Like I was saying, it's between 6 and 7 out of 10. So there is enough good things that we can focus on how to go from okay-ish to really good. And I think that's probably an issue that many people might have. How do you go from this okay-ish step to really good, especially if you don't have access to like good people that can help you or coach you. So I'm really glad that we've covered this. So thank you for sending this to me and allowing me to review it live. I really hope that the next time you apply, it will be more successful. I think with the advice I've given you and the chat has given you, it should be. So I wish you really like the best for the next time that you apply to a position. And I think I just have to say, thank you for watching, and see you next time for another live stream, another video. Bye-bye.